On the eve of the new school year, I decided to start this episode by talking about the recent changes in the school curriculum, which directly affect the future of national languages in modern Russia. First and foremost, this concerns the recent initiative by the Ministry of Education and their attempt to change the very concept of native language in the school curriculum. In other words, they wanted to replace it with languages of the peoples of Russia. Officially, this was explained as the need for unification and bringing things in line with federal standards. But in reality, this would have meant further eroding the already limited space for national languages in schools. As you may remember, in 2018, significant changes were already made to the law, which at the time sparked a strong outcry in many national republics. At that time, studying one's native language became voluntary and limited in duration. This time, there was no mass outcry in our republics. Perhaps because, under current conditions, it has become even harder to protest openly. The Parliament of Tatarstan took a principled stand. Thanks to its consistent actions, the Ministry of Education's proposal was not adopted. Nevertheless, it was not possible to completely fend off the attack on the languages, and starting this year, the number of hours allocated to studying the native language has been reduced from 2 to 1 hour per week. And in some places, elementary school students won't study it at all. And this is despite the fact that just 6 years ago, teachers were saying that even 2 hours a week was already critically little. In our republics, unfortunately, we do not see any political activity or political will on this issue. Although you often hear people talking passionately about the need to preserve the language. And essentially, this is a rejection of the constitutional guarantees for preserving the languages of the peoples of modern Russia.
Biraz da uluslararası gündemden bahsedeceğim. Son zamanlarda en çok dikkat çeken kuruluş Jersey United Council, Birleşik Çerkesya Konseyi, organizasyonun internet kaynaklarında üyeler Litvanya Cumhuriyeti'ne yapılan heyet ziyaretinden bahsediyorlar. Belirtildiğine göre heyet bilim insanları, parlamento milletvekilleri ve ülkenin Dışişleri Bakanlığı çalışanlarıyla bir dizi görüşme gerçekleştirdi. Bu görüşmelerde Rus-Çerkes Savaşı'nda Çerkes soykırımının tanınma olasılığı konusu ele alındı. Yayınlanan açıklamada şu ifadeler yer alıyor alıntı konsey heyeti. Ukrayna parlamentosunun Çerkes soykırımını tanıma kararını hatırlattı ve Litvanya parlamentosu Seymas'ında benzer bir adım atacağı umudunu dile getirdi. Ayrıca Çerkes soykırımının Litvanya'nın gündemine alınmasından önce kamuoyunun bilgilendirilmesinin önemine vurgu yapıldı. Evet, bu süreçte bilim insanlarının, gazetecilerin ve siyasetçilerin aktif rolünün hem Çerkes halkının mücadelesini destekleyeceğini hem de Litvanya'nın insan hakları alanındaki küresel itibarını güçlendireceğini belirtti. Alıntının sonu, bilinen olayların ardından Çerkes meselesi Azerbaycan'da da ilgi görmeye başladı. Yerel televizyon Çerkeslerin tarihi ve günümüzdeki durumu ile ilgili birkaç haber hazırladı bile. Çerkes soykırımı uzun süre izlendi. Sovyet döneminde bu konu yasaklıydı. Bugün bile tanıkların ifadelerine, belgelere ve uluslararası değerlendirmelere rağmen Rusya soykırım gerçeğini kabul etmiyor. Ayrıca bu konunun çeşitli bilimsel platformlarda ve konferanslarda da tartışıldığı biliniyor. Açıkça görülüyor ki bu tür çalışmalar gelecekte daha da yoğunlaşacak. Elbette Moskova'nın Çerkes meselesinin tartışılmasından rahatsız olduğunu inkar etmek anlamsız ve bugün Azerbaycan'ın ya da diğer ülkelerin motivasyonları hakkında konuşmanın bir anlamı yok. Ancak gelecekte uluslararası toplumun bu tür ilgisi de dahil olmak üzere bu konunun artık rahatsızlık aşamasından kabullenme aşamasına geçilmesini zorunlu kılabilir. Bana öyle geliyor ki bu durum herkes için genel olarak işleri kolaylaştırırdı. Ayrıca size başka bir siyasi projeden daha bahsedeceğim. Kısa süre önce internette Çerkes Ulusal Meclisi adında bir başka Çerkes örgütünün kaydının yapıldığına dair bir haber çıktı. Bu örgüt Hollanda'nın Rotterdam şehrinde tescil edildi. Örgütün ana dilde de bir adı var. Vagyaka olarak adlandırılıyor. Belirtmek gerekir ki bu birkaç Çerkes hareketi ve örgütünün özellikle Türkiye, Ürdün, Avrupa, Amerika ve Kanada'dan oluşan bir koalisyonudur. Bunlar arasında Türkiye, Çerkes Federasyonu, Kanadalı GRO örgütü yani Çerkes Repatriasyon Organizasyonu da var. Ayrıca imzacılar arasında Kvarkama Çerkes Derneği Başkanı Zakriyan Apso ve Nürnberg Kültür Derneği de bulunuyor. Ayrıntıları Çerkes Ulusal Meclisi'nin yani Çerkes Ulusal Asamblesi'nin internet sitesinde bulabilirsiniz. Görünüşe göre bu kuruluş daha 23. yılda tescil edilmiş ve bildirildiğine göre bu 22. yılın baharında İstanbul'da düzenlenen konferansın devamı niteliğinde olmuş. Bu konferans hakkında da kanalımızda videolar vardı. Yayınlanan 25'ten fazla maddeye bakılırsa kuruluş kendine oldukça iddialı hedefler koymuş. Bunlar arasında tarihi anavatanına geri dönme hakkı için mücadele ve onun coğrafi bütünlüğünün korunması da var. Ayrıca Çerkes halkının ulusal özgünlüğünün, kültürünün, dilinin ve tarihsel haklarının korunması ve geliştirilmesi de özel bir yer tutuyor. Bunlar evet kamuya açık olarak yayımlanan maddelerden alıntı yapıyor. Ayrıca devletlerle ve çeşitli uluslararası siyasi yapılarla ilişkilerin kurulmasına dair maddeyi, ayrıca uluslararası toplum ve Rusya Federasyonu tarafından soykırımın tanınması için verilen mücadelenin sürdürülmesini de belirtmek gerekir. Ayrıca görevler arasında sosyal projelerin hayata geçirilmesi, okulların, enstitülerin ve kültürel merkezlerin kurulmasına yönelik planlar da yer alıyor. Asamblenin yapısı ve çalışma prensipleri ile ilgili daha ayrıntılı bilgilerin bu yılın 4. ve 5. Ekim tarihlerinde İstanbul'da yapılacak olan kurucu toplantıda sunulacağı bildiriliyor. Gelişmeleri izlemeye devam edeceğiz ve etrafımızda olup bitenleri sizinle birlikte analiz edeceğiz.
If you haven't seen it, let's watch a clip together to understand the context.
It would seem that Adygea shouldn't be of any interest to foreign intelligence agencies. However, the Knights of Cloak and Dagger are always searching for and finding pressure points they can exploit to destabilize the region. And one of those pressure points is the so-called Circassian issue. While searching for information on the internet, I found a large number of websites and channels discussing the Circassian issue. And it's obvious that most foreign channels are pushing a clearly anti-Russian narrative.
It's interesting that, despite all the internal problems in the Republic, the local TV station decided to spend time and resources making a segment about what the author calls the so-called Circassian issue. When there are no answers to pressing problems, of course, you have to look for external enemies. This is a tried and true tactic. At the same time, it's clear that in the absence of real journalism, when it's enough just to create an image packed with assertions, all that's left is to shoot propaganda videos. Even propaganda can be done well, rather than relying on blatantly sensationalist material that isn't backed up by any facts. And of course, the transformation of Adygea state television into a trash bin is yet another problem that could be discussed. But as you may have noticed, over these past 3 years I haven't discussed, or at least I've tried not to discuss, internal issues within the republics. Usually, I don't even respond to attacks like this, but since this is the state television of my home republic, it wouldn't be quite right to just ignore it.
The most aggressive voices against Russia come from former residents of the Circassian republics of the Caucasus, who left the country, left their homelands, and now, from abroad, are spreading truly monstrous anti-people narratives aimed at trying to create some sort of imaginary state of Circassia by separating the republics and other territories where the Adygea people lived from Russia. Larissa Tutsukova and Ademir Kazanikov, based in Georgia, are particularly active in covering this topic. From Turkey, Rustam Quazhef and Martin Kochesikov, who used to live in Turkey but has now moved to the United States, and Kik Kos are involved. From the Czech Republic, Murat Temirov, and from the United States, where he has lived for a long time, Ali Berzagov.
In my opinion, the attempt to lump everything together in this report serves two main purposes. First, as I mentioned earlier, it aims to distract attention from internal issues, including social and economic problems, while trying to prove that things would be much worse otherwise. There is, of course, some truth to this. But there's one catch. Things will get worse not because of external forces, but because of the internal facade. You see, even the lies here are just for show. It's like a rusty pipe that gets painted every year. On the outside it shines, but inside, nothing has changed. At this point, I see no point in discussing these setups. Just like I see no point in cursing the authorities out.
Everything is moving along just fine for us, in the right direction, because we're raising all the issues that concern our people, our republic, our republics. For some reason, they always discuss our government from the dirtiest angle. I just can't understand it.
Well, the second reason, as I see it, for these kinds of generalizations and painting a unified image of the enemy is, of course, an attempt to oversimplify the Circassian issue. Which, of course, should never be allowed. A black and white world, where there are only lovers or haters of Russia, creates the impression that there's no other alternative. and polarization here acts like an old filter. They tried to split the community into us and them, drowning out different opinions in the process. But the problem is, reality is more complicated than any scheme. Independent criticism, different points of view, and discussion still exist, even if people try to squeeze them into black and white frames. Any attempt to oversimplify things will run into the fact that the community is broader and more vibrant than the imposed categories. Today, I will be speaking solely for myself and my project. It's important to immediately point out the fundamental difference between us and the other figures in this story. They are engaged in political activity, during which they openly declare their goals and objectives, as well as their vision of the present and the future. We, on the other hand, focus on analysis and journalistic work. We don't create slogans or call for mobilization. Our task is to observe, document, and explain what's happening based on our own understanding. Our work is about covering political processes and issues that genuinely concern a significant part of the Circassian community around the world. And so that people like the author of the video, Khedive, can't claim that the so-called Circassian issues don't exist, when in reality they do, and they're quite complex. Even among the political activists shown in the segment, their views on the present and future, as well as their ideas about which paths to take, differ greatly, and any attempt to portray them as a homogeneous group clearly doesn't reflect reality. The voice of those who have adapted to today's realities is not the only one. Even Khedive, who joined the new system for his own interests back in the late 90s, can't help but know that for the new generation, issues related to self-identity and rights remain extremely important. The segment attempts to create a convincing picture, and it's likely that the creators themselves genuinely see it that way. Especially, perhaps, against the backdrop of being unable to respond on TV and the widespread blocking of social networks. However, aside from a set of emotional cliches like they're destroying, they're following orders, they're involving the youth, and references to a Telegram channel with 19 subscribers, which is presented as some important source of information and analysis, there's actually nothing shown. There isn't a single example or piece of evidence from our materials, for instance. Let's still focus on a couple of specific examples.
Tuksakova and Kazanikov work at the Circassian Cultural Center in Georgia and run the Circassian Media Telegram channel and YouTube channel.
The worn-out claim about working at the Circassian Cultural Center in Tbilisi. I've said it more than once, and I'll say it again. I have never been, and am not, an employee or member of any existing organization. At the same time, as an independent observer, journalist, or blogger, if you will, I interact situationally with anyone who is open to dialogue. As for the Circassian Center in Tbilisi, it's true that I received some much-needed technical support at the very beginning. I will always be grateful for that. But for at least the past 2 years, I haven't lived in Tbilisi. And that's public information, which is easy to verify. Just like the fact that Larissa hasn't worked at the center for a long time. Honestly, attacks on a mother of many children, whose main work is teaching the Circassian language and working in that field, are at the very least baffling. She hardly does any journalism at all these days. It only takes a couple of minutes to check this. All you have to do is look at her social media pages. Or just ask her colleagues at GTRK, who surely know about her life. So, in my opinion, mentioning her name in the context of this story is just shameful.
The words and actions of the former Russian residents mentioned in these stories are aimed at plunging our republics into war and chaos, just like what happened with Georgia and Ukraine.
What I'm saying is that even the simplest facts in the video are distorted and meant to mislead the viewer. And in this regard, it is especially necessary to address the points made in the story about May 21st.
On foreign information platforms connected to anti-Russian organizations and intelligence agencies, information about the need to hold a march was actively spread. This is on the conscience of the provocateurs who took advantage of the unformed minds of our youth, persuaded them to break the law, and then washed their hands of it.
My principal position is simple. I do not call for street protests or other active actions, and I do not consider it acceptable to push others towards something I cannot do myself. For example, if I were in makeup, I would definitely have a negative attitude towards such calls, because, as I understand it, that's exactly what the system is aiming for, to identify activists on the ground, compromise them, and put pressure on them at the right moment. And this is where a fundamental difference in views emerges with some information resources, including those mentioned on air. Unlike those who call for active measures, our position remains analytical and observant. The report explicitly mentions attempts to fabricate compromising material, stating that those associated with the listed public pages could face criminal liability. At the same time, of course, viewers won't be shown a single post from Circassian media calling for any actions, because there simply aren't any. They say whatever they want on air, knowing that under the current circumstances, even filing a lawsuit for defamation is pretty much pointless. But we'll keep this point in draft form, by the way, until there's an opportunity to legally assess the statements that were made.
Unprincipled people, breaking every divine and human law, willing to sell everything they have for an American $500, from their honor and dignity to their loved ones and their homeland.
Of course, that doesn't change the fact that we are documenting the significance of marches and commemorative events for the people, as well as the authorities' response to their organization. Khadiv's report only confirms that restrictions on mass events are being introduced systematically.
These marches, which were coordinated with the authorities, used to be held in the city of Makeup, but due to the onset of the pandemic and the special military operation, they were cancelled for several years.
The problem isn't that we're talking about this, but that formal pretexts are being invented and conditions are being created to limit access to honoring the memory. In my opinion, there's a very simple truth. It's no longer possible to erase one's history from the memory of the new generation. The knowledge they've gained will remain, and local authorities could use this as an opportunity for dialogue.
Swayed by assurances from abroad, the youth held an unauthorized march, thereby breaking the law. Although everything could have been done legally by submitting the proper notification.
Maybe this is a kind of preparation for next year. If you can't beat them, lead them. And at the head will be figures carrying Russian flags and patriotic slogans. But in my view, this approach will only widen the gap between the authorities and the people. And we will keep watching. Let me repeat once again the point that is always made on Circassian media. The Circassian issue will exist as long as there are members of the Circassian people alive. You can try to discredit it as much as you want. The methods have been very well studied over the past 25 years. You can sling mud at everyone who publicly raises certain questions, produce propaganda pieces at the state's expense, or resort to more radical methods, which are also well known. But that won't solve the problem. One way or another, sooner or later, you'll have to answer the unresolved questions. And as for the obstacles we face today, they need to be documented. This is within our power, and on this channel, we plan to keep doing it, God willing. I guess we should also mention the so-called analyst speakers who, trying to sound upbeat, throw around labels without even realizing what they're saying.
We, for example, are in touch with our diaspora. They have always considered Adygea their ancestral homeland, always stood firmly and loyally with Russia, because, they have a deep and enduring connection to this land and its people.
Adygea is part of Russia, and with both their hearts and souls, they are with Russia. And those forces that are now trying to say something, to somehow harm Russia, to voice their own speculations. They are not with Russia, and their homeland is either Adygea nor Russia.
Some benefits, some relocations from Turkey, Jordan, Syria, those who returned home. We are dealing with these issues. But those who just talk a lot for money, I don't know what their goal is, because wherever they are, things are always murky.
They pursue only one goal, to truly sow discord in the relationships between peoples and states. They can't have any other goal, because there simply can't be another goal here. Most likely, it's not about caring for their own people, but about carrying out someone else's orders.
To be honest, I thought about what to say, but aside from pity and condescension, I don't feel any other emotions. The only thing I would advise the elder who spoke on air is that, next time he visits the mosque, he should ask one of the imams to explain how to repent for publicly slandering and lying about a person with whom he attends the same mosque. As for me, I will leave this to the judgment of the Almighty. Besides the personal attacks, of course, there are a few other points that deserve attention. For example, at the beginning of the video, the author says Adygea received the status of a republic within Russia. It's as if, this was some kind of generous gift from above. This kind of wording actually oversimplifies the events and is misleading. Legally, the republic became a federal subject and signed a federation treaty, becoming one of the entities that formed the Russian Federation. Another point, which is obviously related to the series released on Cherkessian media, goes something like this, that the peak of Circassian issues was in the 2010s.
The main peak was in the early 2010s, leading up to and during the preparation and hosting of the Olympic Games in Sochi in 2014.
This, in fact, is actually a key moment in recent history. After all, it's this part of Circassian history, the history of the 90s, that people didn't just want to hide or keep quiet about, but actually want to erase. And thanks to the short-sightedness of many political activists, it might even seem like they managed to do just that. In the 90s, the Circassian people, like many others across the post-Soviet space, found themselves in a new reality. After decades of silence and bans, for the first time there was an opportunity to openly talk about their history, language, and rights. It was a period of great hope and anticipation for change. In other words, politics was no longer just local, based on the social needs of a specific area or issues related to state farms and collective farms, but became national in scope. The Circassian issue began to take a significant place, including on the agenda of the republics, which was confirmed by the excitement over the restoration of the common flag and a unified name. The adoption of the act recognizing the genocide and the famous statements made by the leadership of the republics at that time, which, of course, were rooted in grassroots pressure and the relevance of these issues to the masses, also serve as confirmation. In addition, I go into detail about international political activities, which became the foundation for further interaction with states and political institutions. Work at the United Nations, cooperation on political and economic issues with countries and other international organizations. All of this demonstrated that the Circassians have enough potential to operate independently, even under the conditions of blockades and obstacles that were created. However, the leadership, still holding on to a Soviet mentality, of course, couldn't handle the responsibility. Some got scared, some didn't believe, others decided to focus on their personal lives, and so on. This, of course, helped suppress the movement, and the people didn't have enough information. Today, in the information age, the excuse of "I didn't know" sounds unconvincing, because if you want to find out, you have resources at your fingertips that you can use. And that's exactly what scares those same Soviet-minded people who still think they're in charge. The world has changed, but they have stayed the same, only changing on the outside. There's no doubt they'll change their appearance again when the time comes. But as they say, the internet remembers everything. In the next episode, we'll talk about the period of the Sochi Olympics that was so concerning for GTRK Adygea, and how it influenced the revival of the Circassian issue. So make sure to hit the notification bell. Let's discuss a few more news stories. We've already talked about the construction of the Legonaki Eco-Resort, and now this topic has taken a new turn. The Prosecutor General's Office of Adygea found violations in the engineering surveys and filed a lawsuit in the Republic's arbitration court to invalidate the positive conclusion of the main state expert review. The first hearing has taken place, and the next one is scheduled for September 5th. At the same time, the project has also attracted attention at the federal level. State Duma deputy from the Communist Party, Oleg Mikhailov, reported numerous falsifications in the project documentation, including in the climate and environmental sections. Judging by the scale of the construction and the amount of investment, the project has clearly gone beyond being just an environmental issue. Around Legonaki, various interests collide, and concern for nature often becomes just one part of a much bigger game. We will continue to follow the court proceedings, even if this story still doesn't interest the Republican television.
Here's yet another of 100 examples of the fiercely Kadzimi-style growth and renewal. Once the turf was removed.
Summer is the season of festivals and concerts. National ensembles perform all over the world. Dozens of festivals have taken place and are still ongoing in Turkey, Jordan, Europe, Canada, the USA, and of course, at home. Among all this diversity, what truly impressed me was the Adygea Dance Theatre Turks. The group has developed a new repertoire and has participated in numerous competitions. But most importantly, you can see how much joy the performers themselves get from what they do. Congratulations on your successful solo concert held recently, and I wish you continued success. And to wrap up this episode, I'd like to end with a segment that has become a favorite among viewers, and for which we've received a ton of positive feedback. So here's the weather forecast for our homeland.
Weather forecast. Sochi 29 degrees Celsius, Tuapse 31 degrees Celsius, Jebga 29 degrees Celsius, Novorossiysk 30 degrees Celsius, Anapa 28 degrees Celsius, Krasnodar 32 degrees Celsius, Adygea 31 degrees Celsius, Makop 32 degrees Celsius, Sibay 30 degrees Celsius, Armavir 32 degrees Celsius, Cherkassk 30 degrees Celsius, Kislovodsk 29 degrees Celsius, Pyatigorsk 33 degrees Celsius, Nalchik 32 degrees Celsius, Terek 34 degrees Celsius, Nartkala 34 degrees Celsius, Mozdok 35 degrees Celsius. Mountains, Fish 13 degrees Celsius, Elbrus -5 degrees Celsius, Dombay 25 degrees Celsius, Black Sea 18 degrees Celsius.
Thank you to everyone who stays with us. Well, we're not going to stay silent and we'll keep telling the truth. Assalamu alaikum.